Welcome back, First Case Network. My name is Hank Balch. You are watching the 2025 Sterile Processing Quality Improvement Expert Series with Gregg Agoston and marcy.konja. And we are on episode 4 today. The episodes are flying by, it feels like, but we are dropping some terrific knowledge, insight, already busting some myths out there, some misconceptions. And on today's episode, we're going to dive into this question around incident reporting and these tracking systems. If you're in the OR, you've probably heard that your sterile processing department has a tracking system. They look things up in these things. They scan them. Sometimes they don't scan them if they need to, and we can maybe reference some of that today. But even though we are miles forward than we were even 10, 20, definitely 30 years ago in our space, there's still a lot of challenges around this topic. So, Gregg, maybe kick us off today and give us some context for instrument tracking at a high level, and then we can start going into where some of these gaps are today.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. Yeah, so what Marcy and I started to discover early on when we first started working in sterile processing together was that there is a big discrepancy with quality tracking and reporting related to SPD, kind of across the board. And the way this came about was we would go into hospitals and they would ask us, say, hey, we're having quality issues, come in and try to help us resolve these problems. And we would ask them for their incident reports. Now, some managers of SPD departments had their own kind of Excel spreadsheet, or maybe they were tracking through one of the instrument tracking systems that they're currently using in SPD. And then we also would look at the system-wide or the hospital system. So whether it's origami or healthcare safety zone, Meditac, some of these different systems that are used to record errors that happen throughout the hospital, in the hospital parking lot, whether it's medication, it's a slip and fall, it's a patient, it's a visitor, whatever it may be, any kind of incident that happens inside the hospital, footprint is recorded in those systems. So a couple of things we did was, when we started looking at the data, we found that there was big discrepancies between the number of errors being reported, even between the different systems. And then we looked at specifically the hospital incident reporting system, which is the requirement for anything that affects a patient or a visitor in that hospital. And we came to find out that for SPD, there's a couple things that really detract from that being an accurate reporting system that help us get to the root cause of problems with SPD. First of all, is that most of the time those systems are only used if it affects the patient or a visitor, right? Second, if it's a quote, near miss, or we call it just a mistake that causes a delay in the operating room, for instance, a missing instrument, a broken instrument, a hole in a peel pack, a hole in wrap, whatever it may be, those types of incidents are not reported in those tracking systems for a number of reasons. First of all, it generally, one, requires the OR, either nurse or technician, to log into a separate system. The time it takes to record it, we've done some time studies, generally 10 to 12 minutes to record that error. And then the length of time to record the error, they could have probably solved the problem by going and get another peel pack or another tray, right? Most of the errors, thankfully, are caught by the technician or the nurses in the room prior to the patient entering the room. This is SPD-related errors. And those errors generally largely go unreported. So when we started to track this, we'd go into hospitals and we get calls by CEOs, COOs of hospitals saying, you got this major issue. We'd go and check on the quality reporting, and we'd find out that they, had very minimal errors being reported, but yet their surgeons are going to the executive offices and complaining about sterile processing. So I said, something's not right here. So what we did is we basically put in a very simple paper-based system in the operating room where they could check off and fill a form out within 3 minutes to tell us. And we work with them to encourage them to report all the errors that they were seeing, so that we could, the premise being is that we can't solve a problem unless we can define the problem. And then, for instance, at one hospital, they have reported about 10 errors a month from 2 hospitals that were managed by this one manager. When we put our system in place, within the first 2 weeks from only one hospital, we had reports of 84 errors related to SPD from just one hospital. The second month, the error rate was over 130 errors between the two hospitals at that system. And again, the SPD manager is looking at reports, incident reports or comments, people call, whatever. She had only like an average of 10 errors a month being reported. That showed you why there was this big, discrepancy between what she was seeing in the department versus what, the surgeons and the OR staff were seeing. So it's a real problem at hospitals. What we found is that the incident reporting systems generally are not being used effectively, as I mentioned before. And two, they don't contain the level of detail needed to get down to find the root cause of the problem. So again, being lean focused, I'm looking to try to figure out why the problem occurs and then how we prevent it. Those bigger systems aren't very efficient for that. And then conversely, with the instrument tracking systems, like most of them have error reporting in them. But what we've also found out is that for error reporting, the operating room really needs to have access to those systems. And in most cases, the OR is not using that system. So they have no access to the system. So again, you're relying on the OR to send some kind of message down to SPD and then SPD to put that into the instrument tracking system. So that system doesn't work. So there's a real problem out there with this. We're working on some solutions. We've got some great ideas and we've got some great success stories because again, once you use the data, again, it's a very data-driven approach. Once you use the data, you can then justify the changes and the resources that you need to improve the quality and production in the department. That's what we're focused on.
So, Marcy, Gregg brought up a really important piece here, right? Is any of these errors that are making their way to the operating room, they're not getting inputted into any system, or they're not getting inputted with a correct amount of information to follow up on. But you also know from the sterile processing side, just like a lot of surgical techs are catching these errors at the patient or before it gets to the patient in sterile processing, we're catching all kinds of errors before they even make it out of SPD. If we've got a quality process in place for this, how have you seen success, or maybe where have you seen gaps in even capturing that point of this incident reporting so that you can improve your internal SPD processes?
Well, one of the things that we see out there is that because departments are so understaffed, and then they may not have the correct leadership or structure, that they're not always doing quality audits of the instrumentation once it's been processed. We like to have somebody standing there and just taking the instrument sets after they've been fully assembled, before they go into the sterilizer, before they're really boxed up and ready to go, so that we don't have to start all over, but actually going through the set and making sure that there are no errors. And we can catch it a lot there. But in the past, we used to rely on just what the OR was saying, but we need to, it's not like we're begging to find out these errors as a, oh, look, we've got so many more errors recorded than what you were saying. But we can't address the problem unless we know what it is. And if the operating room isn't telling us that these scissors aren't sharp, or, these graspers aren't connecting, then if the sterile processing tech isn't noticing it, isn't testing the scissor, by putting that error report in, we can pull it out and make sure that it doesn't get back up to the OR again.
And we'll pick up on the next episode, really digging into what, like some of these specific incidents that we're referring to, kind of dive into the implications of those. But, Marcy, you bring up a terrific point. Like the first two of your three: available, functional, and safe. Well, you can do the available and functional stage in the sterile processing department if you've got that proactive quality audit in place, and that's 2/3 of the battle there. And then you just got to protect the safety for the rest of the flow. Really important. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time to continue digging into this today, but that means you want to tune in for the next episode of this 2025 Sterile Processing Quality Improvement Expert Series. And as I alluded to, we're going to dive into types of incidents, implications to your OR, and how all this affects overall satisfaction and safety across surgical services. So Please tell your friends, your coworkers about this series. Make sure that you connect with Gregg and with Marcy directly through LinkedIn. And we'll see you again next month.